Welcome to Chapter 4, Engaging Cloud Vendors. So in this section, we're going to go over a few topics. The topics include understanding business and financial concepts, finding and evaluating cloud vendors, and then we'll close the chapter with talking about how to choosing a migration approach. So read the introduction on page 128. As you read through that, you're going to see that, the book goes in and starts telling us about how the first 3 chapters had a very big technical slant. It had to. Even if you're not here because you want to understand the technical side of cloud, you need to understand it because it's important to understand what you're trying to do from a business perspective. Now, I would like to think that anybody that was in here probably has at least a little bit of a technical side and is definitely wanting to learn about the technology side. But now we're kind of turning a corner in our book, and we're going to be talking about more of the business side and the things that you have to do in order to buy the cloud, steer the organizations towards the correct version of the cloud. And then finally, whenever we're going to learn about how to migrate people to the cloud and what steps we should take and how we should provide leadership in that area. So, regardless of if you're in here because you are a business person and you didn't necessarily want to know the inner workings of the cloud, everything we've studied up till now is very, very important and something that you did need to know. And then if you are a technical person and you really, really enjoyed the first 3 chapters, now we're approaching a side of the business that's very important as well, because this is how you sell the concept of the cloud and how you get people to go down the road that you're wanting to drive them down. So as we go through and we talk more about the business side, and then also know that we're studying here for our CompTIA CloudEssentials exam. So when we're studying for this material, it kind of separates the financial and business aspect of working with vendors, but they're also very much related, and you'll discover that along the way. So we're going to go into details on how to find and evaluate possible cloud vendors, soliciting bids, running evaluations, working through contracts, and then finally we're going to end the chapter with the different approach of performing migrations. Now we're going to move into our first section in Chapter 4, understanding business and financial concepts. Now, a lot of this is just vocabulary. It's vocabulary that if you've been in the business side, you've been exposed to before. If you haven't, it's still things that you've heard of and just things that you need to make sure that you're up to speed on when you're discussing cloud. So what is the main reason companies move to the cloud? There are lots and lots of reasons. There's services, there's getting out of the data center business, there's spinning up new business, but really and truly, the biggest reason, money. Organizations find that it's cheaper to get into the cloud. They don't have to run their own data centers. They don't have to hire the people. They don't have to buy the buildings. They can go out and spin things up, and it's a lot cheaper. Now, one thing before we jump into this, I always have to caution, it's not always cheaper. You have to know what you're doing. And so you as you're learning about cloud and you've been educated in this, you most definitely need to walk into the door with the understanding that if you take what you have in the data center and you migrate it over and put it into the cloud, it's probably going to be more expensive. You have to use good cloud knowledge and good cloud practices in order to make sure that it's actually cheaper. So when you're looking at the hardware that's in the data center, know that that has been put in place so that an organization can grow into it. And of course, we've already talked about this time and time again, but when you spin up a cloud resource, you want to use as much of it as you can. And then if you need more resources, you can duplicate a server. You can add resources to the server and make it stronger. But the key here is if you have a server sitting in your server room, you want to keep it probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 75% utilized. When you have something running in the cloud, you want it to be as utilized as possible. So again, principles that you have to put in place to ensure that you save money. All right. But what are the main reasons that people move to the cloud? Money. So let's assume that we're going to leave that whole conversation behind and we're going to focus on, we know how to run the cloud. We know how to do it to make it right. And so money. So we spend less on hardware. And then plus our hardware doesn't become obsolete. As we've talked about, whenever you purchase things for a data center, you would buy it with hopes that it would be enough to cover you for the next 5 to 10 years. We no longer have to do that, just for the same reasons we were just talking about. We build servers that we plan to utilize, and we use them. We also spend less on software. We'll talk a little bit more about licensing, but there's ways to spend less on software when you move into the cloud. But you also have to be able to negotiate and do the same things that you do in a regular business. But there are definitely ways to save on software. And most definitely, we're going to spend less on human capital. That's just a fact. Whenever you're going to pay a little bit more for your IT type of resources, but just the fact that you don't have to have anybody running your data center. You don't have to have people coming around and cleaning the building that it's in. You don't have to pay for the electricity that's running into the data center. Lots and lots of ways that you're going to save money, and definitely in the human capital area. So let's take a look here at Table 4.1, comparing capital and operating expenditures. So capital expenditures, spending on an asset such as a building or equipment, and then operating expenditures is spending on ordinary business activities. So whenever you're thinking about capital, think of something that you can touch, and then operating is something that you do. It doesn't always fit that definition, but for the most part, that's an easy way to tell. So some examples here of capital expenditures: new servers, constructing a new server room, or a private jet for the IT staff. And then some of the operating expenditure examples: cloud services, building utilities, employee salaries. And then, is it an asset for capital? Yes. Our operating expenditures, is it an asset? No. So when is it paid for capital? It's upfront with a lump sum. And then operating expenditures is more like a monthly or annual payments. And then the tax treatment with capital expenditures, you deduct over the asset's lifespan. And then with operating expenditures, you deduct in the current tax year. So be sure and study that table once you understand the definitions, and it will help you really get a good definition there. So then, understanding some more of our vocabulary, we want to speak in terms of variable cost and fixed cost. So variable cost will change depending on how much is produced or used. Fixed cost will not change. It will not change regardless of how much is produced. So variable cost, if you're thinking about your own home, think about the variable cost. This is like electricity and water. Depending on how much you use is how much you're going to pay. But then how much you're paying for insurance, and how much you're paying for your mortgage, or how much you're paying in rent. That is a fixed cost. You know that no matter what, it's going to cost a certain amount over time. A little bit more here on variable cost. Variable cost will change depending on how much is produced or used, like raw materials, employee salaries, utilities. Fixed cost will change regardless of how much is produced. It will not change regardless of how much is produced. So, like your lease, paid for the building, or the assembly line. Now, some more things around this variable cost and fixed cost. And again, this is very important to cloud, and you'll learn more as you have these conversations. But, this is one of the reasons that we move into cloud versus having things run in our own data centers. But on-prem, so historically, in the data centers that we own, the variable costs were very little. The fixed cost, almost everything. So we knew about what it was going to cost after we bought a server, hooked it in. We knew that how much the bills were and how much the utilities were on the building. In most cases, when we owned our own, we tried to put it in the basement of some building that we already were using, because it gets expensive just having a building for your data center. But in some cases, there were buildings that were just data centers. But the key concept here is that the variable costs were very little. Fixed cost was almost everything. Now, years later, we move into the cloud. Variable cost, almost everything: compute, storage, licenses, etc. Everything involved in building your machines, utilizing your machines, hooking networking up to your machines, and storage. And then the fixed cost, very few. Now, there are some. We do have reserved instances and other reservations that we can prepay for services so that we know how much it's going to be. So there are still some fixed cost. Now, another thing that we want to talk about here in our financial concepts, and keep in mind, this really is just vocabulary. It's just keeping us up to date, making sure that we're speaking in the same languages. But when you're looking at the licensing model, it's kind of an interesting concept and one that we are all actually a little bit closer to than you might realize. So think about music. Depending on how old you are, I don't know if I'm ashamed or proud to say my first music that I was purchasing was on 8-tracks and records. So for years, that's what we did. And then eventually we bought cassette tapes so that our music was a little bit more portable. And then eventually compact disc came out. Now, what was cool about compact disc is that you could record, you could take a disc and save it onto your computer. You could duplicate it. You could build music playlist. It was a digital representation of our music for the first time. And then after you had that, then you can move it over to, a thumb drive or any number of devices that were sold, of course. And then they came out with the iPod. And then in the iPod world, our music was digital, and we could take what we had on a CD and put it into our iPod. But then we also had this thing called iTunes where we could go out and purchase music for 99 cents a song, and we could pull it down to that device. It still ran through our computer, but it was a different mindset in the way that we were purchasing a service, in this case is a song. And then we got our iPhones, and iPhones really became different because you could still go to the trouble of taking your digital music and bringing it over. But then a lot of people, including myself, started thinking, instead of bringing all of these albums over, what if I just purchased the song and I just gave 99 cents for the song? I know I own it. I might own it on 8-track all the way through compact disc, but it's easier because it's all just there in the cloud. And then if I get a new device, it's already there. And then after that, we're going to a completely new model where we have these services like Spotify, where I'm going to pay for a service fee, and I have every piece of music that I ever could even dream of is out there, and I'm paying $15 a month for it, and I can pull it down. Well, this is the same concept as we're talking about when we think about our licensing model. We have licenses that we used to use on our servers. But then when we move to the cloud, we think, okay, look, I've already paid for that license. But wouldn't it be nice if I was getting everything on one bill from the cloud service provider? What if I just quit paying this license on the side and migrated over to paying the cloud service provider in their marketplace and utilizing that license? So again, think about in those terms whenever you're thinking about how these licenses work, and it's the exact same mindset. So some of the license models that we talk about here, pay per user or pay per device. You can also buy licensing models where you pay per server. You might pay per network. And then we also have this concept of BYOL, bring your own licenses. This is if you've already negotiated with a vendor and you have a license set, and so you don't want to have to change that up and you don't want to change, so you can bring your own license. And then the subscription, this is more like the marketplace. This is where anything new that you do in the cloud, you just find it's easier to say, I'm just going to go through the marketplace. That way I know exactly how much this is going to cost. And I can just throw it right on my bill, and I'll just pay for my software at the end of the month. So again, lots of ways to think about the licensing model, but here's just some of the concepts and the ways that you need to think about this. All right, a little bit more on our human capital. We reduced the need for on-prem staff, increased the need for cloud engineers, architects, and DevOps, increased time to market, and then our managed services. Many companies have sprung up for this. So we have daily management and troubleshooting, performance testing, monitoring and reporting, and backup and recovery. So just a little bit more on this, and we'll talk about this when we talk about total cost of ownership. But you do reduce the need for the IT on-prem staff. And I used to go into a data center for a company I worked at, and there was usually there were several people in the office, mainly because there were office space associated with it. And then, if there were vice presidents and directors in there, they might bring their admin in to be right there. And of course, if you're going to have that, you have to have a kitchen, you have to have coffee. So there are lots of little bitty expenses that you don't even think about, but they're all associated with the data center. Plus, you have to have the guys that hook the servers up. You have to know there's usually at least one. Hopefully, you have more than just one. But there are always these guys that run the data center. They consider it their own. They're great resources, but they're a human cost. They're a cost that you don't want to have to think about you don't have to think about whenever you're in the cloud. But, and then of course, I'm even talking about trash. Every single bill that's associated with that building is part of your total cost of ownership and has to do with how much it costs to run that environment. So you can't get away from the human capital. You might think, well, you just hook a server up. What is the human capital? Human capital is every person that has anything at all to do with the running of that data center. All right, another cost to consider when you're thinking about human capital is professional services. So there are 3 links here. We'll go ahead and click on them. But our professional services is whenever you run things with your own staff, but then you run into an area where you really need some experts. So in that case, you're probably going to want to reach out to the cloud service provider and use some professional services. Professional services come in a couple of different flavors. One is like if you go to Amazon and you hire an Amazon resource. If you're standing up control tower and you need to bring people in that really know that and can do it cheap, you want to go out here and you might want to get direct Amazon people. Now, here's another concept. You're still paying for experts, but Amazon has a number of partners. So if you don't want to pay for Amazon necessarily, but you want to go out here and read up and talk to Amazon, talk to your technical account manager and say, look, I'm looking for somebody who can help me in this very specific area. Amazon will go find those people for you, or you can come out to their site and start looking and find the people that are experts in certain areas. Then out here, you can also look through some program success stories. This is the greatest place to start. And, you could sit there for one afternoon and do some reading and come around and be very, very educated in that. And then all of a sudden you can go out and find you a partner to do exactly what you want to do. All right. I showed you Amazon. Just want to be fair here. And I'm going to show you Google Cloud. So they also have a site out here that's dedicated towards their professional services. You can bring in Google people, or you can go out and find partners and that have experience in that. And then finally, let's do Microsoft. And so here again, you can watch, you can learn about the partners with Microsoft. They have videos, lots of information. And again, it doesn't take you very long at all to come out here and start doing the research and finding the ability to get a partner that can do exactly what you're trying to do inside your environment. The second section in engaging cloud vendors is finding and evaluating cloud vendors. So some of the things that we look at when we're talking about finding and evaluating cloud vendors: how to decide what cloud service provider, what partner, what service. So if you remember, you want to look at, say, what are the reasons that we'd want to go with AWS? What are the reasons we'd want to go with Microsoft, Google, Oracle, IBM, any number of clouds out there. And then the other thing that you want to look at ahead of time are the partners. If I do go with a certain vendor, how am I going to choose, who would be the best partner to go with? Maybe the partner list is what drives who I decided to go with. And then what services? If you are looking at services that mainly Amazon has, of course, you need to go with them. If you're looking for services that are more geared towards business processes, and maybe Microsoft Azure is the way you want to go. Or if you are out there and you're a data scientist and you're doing all kinds of stuff that pulls in from Google Maps, that would make more sense because you can pull down the data and use it within Google on their virtual machines, and then they will also partner with you and help you do that. So it depends on what you're wanting to do. The first thing we want to do is start gathering information. Like, what kinds of solutions are we looking for? Are we looking for infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service? What we're looking for? Are we looking for an open source platform to help us, or are we looking to run our own proprietary technology? Other considerations whenever you're looking at this is no vendor lock. Maybe you want to make sure that you can change down the road if you need to. Greater flexibility in development, faster updates, support from big companies, more features, clear SLAs. The most important concept to get here is, like most things in IT, there's no silver bullet. It's kind of a rule. Stay away from people who act like there is. If people try to tell you, there's only one type of database we want to use, there's only one of this, those people tend to not last that long. Those salesmen don't last that long. It always depends on the use case. So every case drives the requirements, and every case is dependent, and you have a certain criteria for the solution that you're trying to solve for. And so you want to be sure that you go through this in the same type of manner every time, of sitting down and saying, okay, we have this new case. Why should we go with a certain CSP? Why would we want to go with this type of solution? Every one of them are independent and deserve that time up front to make sure that you are doing a really good job of evaluating your vendors. Couple of more vocabulary type of words here that we need to know. These are industry standard. I say vocabulary because if you haven't heard of these before, you need to memorize them like vocabulary, but then they need to become second nature to you. So you have RFIs, RFQs, and RFPs. So an RFI is a request for information. It's a little bit less detailed, but it's vendors will throw out, not vendors, but people who are the business owners will throw out a request for information and have vendors come back and answer that. An RFQ is a request for quotation, meaning that they want to know about how much it's going to cost. And then the one that's really detailed, and when you know that it's kind of something where they're going to evaluate and make a selection, is a request for a proposal. So the RFP is the one that's the most advanced in this. So look here on table 4.4, comparing RFIs, RFQs, and RFPs. So for the purpose, an RFI is information gathering, RFQ is for pricing request, RFP is an in-depth project proposal. So an example of an RFI, doing research on potential vendors. An example of an RFQ, I have a 500 terabyte storage space needed. And then the RFP, looking for cloud solutions for a broad business challenge. RFI, the number of people involved in this, the number of vendors. RFI, tons. People throwing out something, they want lots and lots of feedback. RFQ, no more than 3 to 5. RFP, no more than 3 to 5. So an RFQ and an RFP are kind of the same there, in that you don't want to have so much information that you can't do something with it. So at this point, you've narrowed it down to the type of people and the types of companies that you're going to go with to get that information. And then the next steps of an RFI is like an RFQ or an RFP. The next steps of an RFQ, the winner gets the contract. Next steps in an RFP, finalize statement of work with the winner. Some more words and vocabulary in here. But again, they become more than vocabulary when you start working in the business world, but you want to walk in the door knowing how to talk the talk. So an SOW, or statement of work, provided by potential vendor, details on what will be performed. And then service level agreements, these are metrics for measuring success. And they also sometimes include what, I hate to use the word punishment, but it says what is the cost if you don't meet a certain measurement of success. Some more things in here when we're evaluating our vendors. Proof of concept. It's a small project, demonstrates feasibility. Proof of value. Was the proof of concept feasible? And then a pilot, which is a small scale rollout of a solution. So in our table here in 4.5, where we're comparing the ones with a proof of concept or a proof of value, if the goal is to prove a solution works or adds value in a test environment, when you're talking about going into a pilot, you're trying to prove that the solution works in a production with low risk. Then when we move to production, this enables the business to run. So that's the goal of those. And then number of users with a POC or a POV, less than 10. Pilot, less than 100 or maybe like 10% of your users. And then production, that means you've moved it in. All users are impacted. So the user's role in a POC is like testing and feedback. In a pilot, perform job task and provide the feedback. And when it's in production, it's to perform all the task. Support systems. So with a proof of concept, proof of value, it's very informal, mainly like development systems. But then your support system with a pilot, it's a little more formal. They call it hypercare. And this means your development team or a help desk. And then when you move into production, it's help desk. It's if there's a problem, contact the help desk. And then we have our business impact of the issues with a POC or a POV, very, very low. Doesn't matter. If you go out there and you try it and it doesn't work, no big deal. You're not using production data or anything. With a pilot, you've put a little more effort into it. So the business impact is medium because you've now not only have you paid your development team and the infrastructure team and all the people to get all the pieces in place, you've also paid the testers. So you've taken people from working their jobs and got them in a place where they are now working on this pilot. So it's a pretty substantial business impact. And then with production, extremely high. This means that you have taken a production system and either created a new one or replaced an old one, and people are using it. And if there are problems, this means the business impact is huge. A few more things here to look at: negotiating contracts and billing. So contracts and our terms of service, privacy and security policies, acceptable use policies, service level agreements, egress terms, and billing. So you're going to need to read your book to get more details on this, but these are the types of things that we need to consider when we're finding and evaluating our vendors. So for the CompTIA Cloud Essentials Plus exam, you'll be expected to understand some of the following here: contracts, billing, RFIs, RFQs. They're not specifically listed on the exam, but it's likely they'll appear in the exam itself. But again, you know what these are. We talked about them. Just know that RFPs and RFQs are the way that customers reach out and have vendors respond to them and to tell them how they would solve certain problems. Statement of work, you need to know what that is. Statement of work is where you take all of those requirements and you actually produce a document that says this is what is expected in the solution. Service level agreements, again, those are they expressly state out this is what is expected, but then it also is going to have what the punishment is if you don't meet the certain criteria of the SLA. So let's say I say that I have a system that has an uptime of 95%. If I dip below 95%, there needs to be some kind of payment or some punishment where I can. And then also in the reverse way, if I keep the system up 100% of the time, maybe there's an extra payout for what that means. And then also evaluations with the pilot, proof of concept, proof of value, and the success criteria, and then open source versus proprietary. The third and final section of Chapter 4, Engaging Cloud Vendors, is the choosing a migration approach. So after you've made the decision to migrate to the cloud, now what? What components should you move? What workloads? What services are you going to use? What is the migration plan? Is it everything at once? Is it storage first and the entire applications? Will you use an integrator? Are you going to use professional services? These are just some of the questions that we have to start asking ourselves when we're figuring out what are we going to do. So as we're looking through here, here's a list of steps. Now, every company you work for is probably going to have their own version of this, but we are going to take a look at this list, and starting with a list is better than starting with no list. So as we look through here, we're going to say, step 1, catalog the data, applications, processes, or workloads that will be migrated, classify them by size and complexity. I work some migration projects, and it's funny how when you start doing this at first, some of your business users will start feeling uneasy because they're thinking, why are you here? You're just asking questions. But it's key to get this listed correctly. And then you also want to baseline this because you want to be able to tell people, at this certain date, this is what you told me we were going to migrate. Now, months later, you're adding things. Let's go back and look, and it'll quickly, as long as, if you take the time to make sure that you've documented these things and people see that you have, they will question you less. Step 2, prioritize the order in which items will be migrated. I hate to sound like a broken record, but storage is always one of the best places to start, especially with anything that's object storage, because it's an easy way to get some good movement. And it's also a way to get people to really appreciate it. They're like, wow, we moved our storage. It's faster and it's cheaper. And it'll get people on board and more excited about the rest of your cloud migration. Now, that being said, remember I told you, always be careful if you run into somebody that says that there's a silver bullet or there's only one way to do something. Ask the questions, find out, make sure that you're migrating things in the appropriate order. Then step 3, define how much of the migration will be handled by the CSP or the MSP and how much will be handled by internal staff. Processes and roles need to be clear to everyone. This is very key. We do want to have your vendor in there early, but you want to make sure that they're helping. You want to make sure that they're participating, and you want to be establishing what is the most cost-effective way to do this and what is the best way to do this. If you're lucky, your internal staff is getting smarter and smarter and know how to do this, because if you're at the mercy of Microsoft, if you're at the mercy of AWS, if you're at the mercy of Google, that can be a little bit more costly of a thing. But then again, if you're wanting to move to the cloud, maybe that's what you want to do. You're willing to pay more to get them to do that, and you want it done correctly. But again, I just can't help but feel like you're better off if your staff and the people that work for your company understand things and can help you more. It just seems to run a little smoother. Step 4, assign the right personnel to manage the migration for all the reasons I just said. Look at the cost and look at how effective they need to be and make sure that you have the right people doing the right thing. Step 5, create the plan for migration, roadmap, and schedule. It's key to make sure that everybody is on board with the schedule, everybody has access to be able to see it, and when changes occur that they can see those as well. Establish key KPIs for migration plan and schedule. That's key performance indicators. Again, it's kind of like your baseline. It's saying, this is what things look like today. Then we migrate. This is what they look like now. So you want to be able to measure that success, especially if somebody comes back and says, this doesn't seem to be as fast as it used to be. If you have some KPIs in place and you can show that it's faster, better, it just makes things work out better. And then number 7, develop a security plan for pre and post migration. This is extremely important because you don't want to introduce security issues that weren't there before. And if you have any security issues that run your historical system, you don't want to bring them in with you. So you definitely want to make sure that you have security-minded people on your project. Now, number 8, communicate the migration plan to the key stakeholders. Again, this goes back to what I was saying before. You want to communicate this out often, and you want to communicate it very clearly. As a project manager or as a company leader, sometimes you're guilty of not wanting to bring in bad news, but you have to remove yourself from it. If things are not perfect, make sure it's clear that they're not perfect. It's much easier to go back and show people, that that you've been honest all along than to try to cover something up. So again, just basic project management rules there. And then number 9, schedule check-ins. Perform them with the migration execution team. Again, that goes back. Make sure you're always telling the truth. Make sure that you're laying the schedule out. And if there's any problems with the schedule at all, make sure they're well documented. And who knows, you might find out who your true powerful people in the organization are the ones that will knock down doors and help you in this type of situation. And then finally, number 10, test the migration, fix the issues as needed. All right, and then a little more on here of looking out for the following. This is all starts on page 151. Your book is really good, so I would read it, but I'm going to give you the highlights here. Watch complexity creep. So with complexity creep, lots of systems, multi-cloud and hybrid, so things can get very complex very quick. Now, there's a couple of different things to think about here whenever you're talking about complexity creep. Maybe it's getting more complex because you're discovering more things, and maybe it's getting more complex because things are being allowed in. So you have to determine what the appetite is for your company for good project management, good leadership, and you want to make sure that if something's being brought into the environment and it needs to be, that's a good thing. You've identified it, but you want to have good change control where you're saying this is what it was, but now our complexity is getting a little bit more and we're bringing that in. And then the other school of thought on this, depending on what the appetite for the company is some complexity you might need to stop. Might say, hey, this complexity creep is coming in and we can't have it. We need to stop it. Another thing, application issues. So some apps are designed to run locally and some are not designed well for going to the cloud. So you want to make sure you identify those things. And, if you're in a situation where you can make the updates that are required for that, this is a great time to do that. It will just add to the success of your project. In some cases, you're running out of a space, you're getting kicked out of the data center, you're moving an application, and even though it doesn't run as good, you're still forced to do that. So you want to make sure that you don't have any issues that you bring into the environment that you can't live with. I have some examples, but I'm afraid if I start listing those out, might take a little too much time here. But you really, this is when you want to make sure that you're communicating well with your business and making sure that, if there are application issues because you're moving into the cloud, say these are the issues, and find out, say, do you want to put change request in? Do you want to spend more money and fix those now? Or do you want to fix them later? Or are you just going to live with them? Don't feel like you were personally making that decision. You present the facts, you let them tell you what you want to do. Other things in here, some apps have dependencies. Plan for these. Some apps have dependencies for things that are running on the server. Some have dependencies on other applications. Main thing is make sure it works when you move it over. You don't want to do a cloud migration, remove the old hardware and find out you left something broken out there. And then finally, security risk. Always, you should be thinking about security. You should also have security-minded people on your project. If you can get the ISO there, you want to make sure that they are a part of the project every step of the way, because it's important to make sure that you've always thought about your security risk. And then you can work with the owners, and then you also can work with the cloud service providers to ensure that they also are helping you think about the security things. All right, and then some of our migration strategies. So we have lift and shift, rip and replace, hybrid and phase migrations, phased. Every company is going to have their own verbiage for this. Every CSP kind of has their own verbiage for this. But this is what our book went with, and it's a good list. Again, our CSPs might call it just a little bit different, and some of them have their own flavor of things that they throw out there. One of my favorite is Amazon says lift, tinker, and shift. They have a few more things in here, but we'll stick to what the book material here is and what we're studying for the exam. So in a lift and shift, data and applications are moved to the cloud as is. It's quick, easy, no changes. When I say it's quick and easy, I do mean on the migration team. Might not be on the users, might not be on the development staff that has to do things later. But if you're looking for the easiest way for a cloud migration to go, cheapest, easiest, lift and shift. Pick it up, move it over, and you're done. The next one we have here is rip and replace. This means the app will be completely redesigned from scratch during migration using only cloud native components. So this is really good for like older applications and applications that need to be updated anyway. I have several examples of these where we picked up apps, we containerized them, we made them run on the cloud, and by the time we were done, they went in and tried to stress test them and find out they could no longer stress test applications that have barely been able to run for years because we made some updates and we changed the way they were working and made them work better. I mean, that's ideal. That's what you want out of your cloud environment. And then we have our hybrid migration. So as the term implies, combination of lift and shift and rip and replace. And then we have our phased migrations. Now, here are some phases. Again, every company might list these a little different. Every CSP might have something different, but this is a good starting place, especially if you're working for a company that doesn't necessarily have a starting place. This is a great one. So you have do your cloud assessments, proof of concept, proof of value. Then you do your data migration, your app migration, cloud usage. And then the final step, once everything is over there, then you start optimizing, looking for ways to make the environment better. In this chapter, you learned about the financial aspects of engaging a cloud provider, business aspects of vendor relationships, and the cloud migration approaches. The chapter started with description of various business and financial terms in which you might hear when you're working with CSPs. These include capital and operating expenditures, variable and fixed cost, bringing your own license or BYOL, and subscription licensing model, human capital, and professional services. Next, we discussed finding and evaluating potential cloud vendors. The first thing to understand is if you need an open source proprietary cloud platform, then you can send out for a request for information, which usually leads to a request for quotation or an RFQ, or a request for proposal, an RFP. The RFP usually includes the statement of work or the SOW and performs metrics in the service level agreement or the SLA. Suppliers can be evaluated by running projects such as a proof of concept, a proof of value, or a pilot. Be sure to specify success criteria for all evaluations. Once your evaluation is complete, you can move on to negotiating and signing the contract and clarifying the billing process. Finally, we looked at cloud migration approaches. The two discrete approaches are lift and shift and rip and replace. Combination of these is called a hybrid approach, and migrations are usually not completed in one step. Such migrations are said to have a phased migration. All right, now we're going to go on to our exam essentials. And remember, the exam essentials are kind of like our little flashcards. They let us know what we know, and then it also lets us know what we don't know, so we know where we need to go back and reread. I would definitely say that after you've mastered the material, the exam essentials section is the best place to come in and to run back through the material and ensure that you know it all good enough to go take the exam. So here's the first one. Know the difference between capital expenditures and operating expenditures. Capital expenditure is a one-time expense generally used to acquire a fixed asset. For tax purposes, capital expenditures are depreciated over time. Operating expenditures are used to support the ongoing cost of conducting day-to-day business, such as salaries, utilities, office supplies, and research and development. Operating expenditures are accounted for in the current year. Understand the difference between variable cost and fixed cost. Variable cost changes from month to month and year to year. A fixed cost does not. Understand the BYOL licensing model. So bring your own license model gives users the flexibility to use existing licenses they have already paid for. So a BYOL term lets the licensor be redeployed from one device or user to another. This is greater flexibility, lower cost, and better licensing management. Understand the subscription licensing model. Under the subscription license model, users essentially pay to lease the rights to use software for a specified period of time, generally 1 year. This in contrast to perpetual license, which grants use for the lifetime of the app. Summarize the financial aspects of contracts and billing. The contract is a legally binding document that outlines the roles and responsibility of the cloud provider and the client. It should contain terms of service, privacy, and security policies, acceptable use policy, a service level agreement, and egress terms. Billing will happen either automatically or when a certain level of usage is obtained. Know the request for information is used. When seeking cloud vendors, an RFI is a document designed to collect written information about a CSP's ability. It's the first formal request for information and is usually followed by an RFP or an RFQ. Understand what human capital is and the difference between training and professional development. Human capital is the knowledge, skills, and experience possessed by the IT staff. Training is short-term experience designed to teach skills specifically needed to perform a task. Professional development is a longer-term approach focused on employee growth. Know the business aspects of the 4 professional services. The 4 professional services you should be familiar with are TTM, skill availability, support, and managed services. Know what a statement of work is, or an SOW. An SOW is a document that is provided by the CSP that outlines specific work to be performed by them. Understand what an SLA is. SLA is a service level agreement, usually associated with the statement of work. It provides metrics for measuring the success of the statement of work. Understand how a pilot is used. Pilot is a small-scale initial rollout of a project into the production environment. The goal is to test the solution among a small number of users and to see whether it works in the production environment. Know the difference between a POC and a POV. Both the POC and the POV are deployed in a test environment with a small number of users. A proof of concept, or POC, is designed to prove that the technology works, and a proof of value, a POV, should tell you whether the test will deliver the value, such as cost savings or extra sales, that you expect it to. Understand the difference between open source and proprietary clouds. Open source means that the software is usually free or cheaper, and the code can be modified. Proprietary software has source code that cannot be modified except by the company that produced it. Open source clouds are generally less expensive, have less risk of the vendor lock-in, provide greater flexibility in development, and are faster to update and to upgrade. Proprietary clouds offer the backing and support of a big company with more features and SLAs. Know what rip and replace migration is? Rip and replace is the old software is completely rebuilt as it's moved to the cloud. It can take longer and initially be more expensive, but it allows older apps to take full advantage of the features. Know what a lift and shift migration is? A lift and shift migration, apps and the data are simply moved from one location, such as on-premise, to the cloud. They are comparatively faster and cheap. Older software that is not optimized for the cloud might not realize all of the efficiencies of the cloud migration, however. Understand what hybrid and phase migrations are. A hybrid migration is one that combines rip and replace or lift and shift, or one where some services stay on-premise where others move to the cloud. A phase migration is one that takes place in steps over time, such as moving data in the first year and applications the second year. If you haven't already, you should read the chapter, and the chapter is from pages 127 to 162. Right, now we're going to do our written lab, and as I've said before, I kind of like the written lab a little bit more because after you've read the material and you can do it, you feel a little better when you actually choose the word better than when you just do the multiple choice. But we're going to do them both here. So a blank is expenditure will, for tax purposes, be depreciated over the lifespan of an asset. Capital. A blank license allows holders to move software from an on-premise device to the cloud. This is a BYOL, or bring your own license. When referring to employees, blank is long-term educational process focused on long-term career goals. This is professional development. How fast an idea goes from the idea stage to being ready to sell is called what? Time to market, or TTM. Hiring out cloud management and performance testing is an example of what? Managed services. What is the name of the document that specifies metrics used to determine whether a CSP is delivering what they said they were supposed to? Service level agreement, or SLA. After approving an RFI, you want a company to provide more detailed description of how they would solve your problem. What should you request? Request for proposal, or an RFP. What type of cloud environment of evaluation is performed in a production environment? That's a pilot. In a cloud contract, which section specifies how a company can get its data back if the agreement ends? These are the egress terms. There's ingress and egress when you're having that conversation, and egress is when you're taking your stuff out. What type of migration allows all applications to fully benefit from the cloud? Rip and replace. Okay, we're going to go do our review questions. We're going to go here and go to chapter 4. For corporate tax purposes, which of the following types of expenditures would be depreciated over several years? Choose 2. That's the last 2, proprietary tax and 4 servers. Sue, an IT employee, tells her manager that she wants to create a 5-year plan to fulfill some career goals. What type of plan does Sue need? Professional development. Your company has decided to move to the cloud. However, a research and development database has high security needs and will be kept on-premise. What type of migration is best for this situation? This would be the hybrid. You've just approved an RFP from a cloud vendor. Which of the following could be logical next steps to move to the cloud services? This will be your pilot and your proof of concept. Your company is migrated to the cloud. Users need both commercial and proprietary software packages, and both types will be migrated. The migration needs to happen quickly. Which type of migrations are most suited for this situation? Choose 2. Lift and shift and hybrid. The IT department is going to run small cloud evaluation in the production environment to see if there are any app compatibility issues. Which type of evaluation will they be running? This would be the pilot. Your organization is considering moving from an on-premise data center to the cloud. A financial manager asks about the benefit of using pay-as-you-go model for the service. Which of the following is a benefit of pay-as-you-go? This one is C. It converts a capital expenditure into an operating expenditure. Your company is debating potential cloud solutions. Which of the following are benefits of going with a proprietary cloud platform? Be the first 2, large company support, enhanced features. After migrating to the cloud, your company hires external technical expertise to perform cloud optimization and troubleshooting. What is this an example of? Managed services. Your company is moving all IT infrastructure to the cloud. The company has a 5-year database license. Which of the following can save the company money on migrating the database to the cloud? This would be a BYOL. CSP has just completed an RFP and you accepted it. Which of the following is the most appropriate next step? Remember, you have RFI, RFQ, RFP. Then the next step is the statement of work, SOW. You are acquiring new cloud-based software for your company. The developer will only sell you the software on a subscription basis. Which of the following is not an advantage of subscription-based pricing? This one would be D. The company is required to pay for the software only once. A manager in your company wants to ensure that the cloud solution you are proposing will help with GTM. What does the manager mean by this? Remember, TTM refers to the ability to get a product or service from the idea stage to selling it. So it's C, how long it takes to get from the idea stage to selling the product. You're looking for a new CSP. Your company wants to ensure that any intellectual property rights are clearly owned by the company and that the CSP has no stake in them. Where will this be specified? It says the contract. Contract will specify terms of service, which includes intellectual property rights and others. Your company is evaluating payment options for the new CSP. Which of the following could be an advantage of going with a subscription-based pricing for the cloud as opposed to pay-as-you-go? Choose 2. This will be the last 2. Might be cheaper with the discounts. It provides for easier planning with fixed cost versus variable cost. You have received several RFIs from potential cloud vendors. Now you want to know how much it will cost for a standard set of 4 virtual machines. What will you ask for next? After the RFI comes the RFQ. You are seeking to pilot a new cloud-based soft service and have several CSPs to choose from. Which of the following should not be selection criteria for choosing which company to pilot with? This one is successful completion of the pilot. You are creating an RFI to seek out potential CSPs. Which of the following is not recommended to include in the RFI? What would be the statement of work, or SOW. Your company has decided to move its extensive on-premise IT infrastructure to the cloud. Because of the cost involved, management decides to move some services this fiscal year and move the rest services the next fiscal year. What type of migration are you performing? Phased. You moved to the cloud and are now seeking out professional services. Which of the following is not an example of cloud professional services? This will be the first one, the running a POC and establishing proper success criteria.